what the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. But now I want you to truly ponder this. What if everything holding you back, emotionally, financially, and even spiritually, isn't a lack of opportunity, bad luck, or even destiny? What if it's merely a mental pattern, an invisible habit repeated for years, a pattern so automatic that you no longer even notice it, yet it's silently dictating how much money you earn, how you react to setbacks, which opportunities you see, and even who you believe yourself to be? What if changing just one single pattern could lead to a transformation you'd feel in a matter of days? Sounds absurd, doesn't it? And that's precisely how I want it to sound. Because all true transformation begins with a shock. The most destructive pattern out there is the one you repeat without even realizing it. The pattern of limiting belief. It acts in silence, infiltrates your thoughts, shapes your decisions, and precisely controls how far you believe you can go. And perhaps you didn't even consciously choose this pattern. It might have been inherited from your family, from the circumstances in which you grew up, from comparisons made about you in childhood, or from times someone told you that you weren't cut out for this or lacked talent for that. The truth is, most people live with beliefs that aren't their own, yet they behave like invisible shackles that bind dreams, ambitions, and even the ability to see opportunities when they arise. How many opportunities have you let slip by because you thought, "That's not for me"? How many times have you watched someone grow, prosper, advance, and felt that their reality was too far removed from your own? How many times have you sabotaged yourself before even trying? Because the voice inside your head seemed more convincing than anything the world could offer you. What's most intriguing is that Stanford University research shows that 70% of people drastically underestimate their own financial and emotional potential simply because they associate risk with failure, money with suffering, and attempts with the fear of making mistakes. This means it's not the world holding you back from prospering, it's the mental pattern that has convinced you that you can't. Imagine for a moment that you're about to start a business. What comes to mind first? The possibility of success or the fear of losing everything? The answer reveals more about your patterns than you might think. Most immediately think of the negative scenario because they've learned to think that way. And this thought repeats itself like a silent soundtrack, accompanying every important decision. The human brain doesn't like change, it likes to repeat. Repeating what's been said, repeating what's been seen, repeating what's been learned, even if that learning was based on fear, scarcity, or the experiences of others who projected their frustrations onto you. And that's why, when someone thinks big, dreams grand, or decides to pursue something significant, an almost automatic barrier arises saying, "Be careful. That's too much for you. Who do you think you are?" This barrier isn't rational, it's an echo, an inherited pattern reinforced by years of repetition. But there's an essential detail: patterns can be broken, and breaking them creates change in a matter of days, because what changes isn't the world, but how you react to it. A clear example of this is something that happens to millions of people: the desire to earn more money. They say they want it, but when an opportunity arises, a partnership, a course, an investment, a chance to start a business, they freeze. They look at the opportunity and can only see risk, and as long as they keep reacting this way, life remains the same. Have you ever noticed this happening to you? That feeling that you could be better off, have more, live more, but there's always something invisible holding you back. And here we come to a real and decisive moment in Napoleon Hill's life. Still young, living in a poor region, his father insisted that he follow the common path, working as a miner, like almost everyone around them. This was the expected reality, the imposed destiny, the accepted pattern. Hill believed this was his future, because it was the future of everyone around him. Until one day he met a journalist who encouraged him to write, saying that he possessed something rare, the ability to observe human behavior deeply. This encounter completely changed his life. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that he didn't have to accept the inherited pattern, that he could choose another destiny. This episode sparks a mixture of curiosity and emotional impact in the audience because it raises an inevitable question. What if I too am living a life I didn't choose? And what if my current reality isn't a result of my capabilities, but of the pattern I accepted without questioning. Beginning to break this pattern requires courage, but it doesn't demand extraordinary skills. It requires you to question what you've always accepted as truth, to ask yourself, why do I believe I can't? Who put this idea in my head? How many times have I repeated something I've never tested in practice? When you start asking these kinds of questions, something shifts internally. A break begins. And this break, no matter how small, is the first sign that a new life is being born. If you change this pattern, even just a little bit in the coming days, you'll notice something impressive. New ideas emerge, new possibilities appear, new opportunities begin to make sense. Not because the world has changed, but because you've changed the lens through which you observe that world. The pattern of limiting belief is the first to be broken because it is the root. And when the root changes, everything that grows from it transforms along with it. There's an emotional pattern that silently controls most people's lives. The automatic reaction to any situation that triggers fear, pressure, demands, or uncertainty. You notice this when you receive an unexpected bill and feel your body freeze, when someone criticizes your work and, even knowing you could improve, you shrink internally, or when an opportunity appears and, instead of feeling enthusiasm, you feel a tightness that prevents you from taking the next step. This pattern wasn't born with you. It was molded by years of accumulated experiences, some your own, others absorbed from people around you, and today it functions like an emotional autopilot. Before you even think, it has already decided how you will react. And what's most striking is that this reaction directly defines your financial life, your relationships, your self-confidence, and your capacity for growth. The human brain tends to react based on what's familiar, not what's best. That's why even when you want to change, a part of you insists on repeating old reactions. If you grew up hearing adults say that money brings problems, your body reacts with fear every time a financial opportunity appears. If you learned that making mistakes is shameful, you feel anxiety just thinking about trying something new. If you were accustomed to hearing that things never work out anyway, your emotional pattern transforms any setback into a sign of defeat. And have you noticed that this repeats almost like a curse? No matter how many times you promise yourself that this time will be different, at the moment of emotional impulse, the old reaction takes over and you return to the same cycle. Imagine a simple situation. You're about to talk to someone about a raise or an opportunity, but the mere thought of possible rejection already makes your heart race. Your mind creates negative scenarios. Your body interprets this as a threat. And before you utter a single word, your energy drops, your voice changes, your posture shrinks. The result? You self-sabotage, not due to a lack of ability, but because your emotional pattern reacted first. And this same dynamic happens with money, with relationships, with personal projects, with growth opportunities. How many chances have you let slip by because you felt fear? How many times have you given up, not because it was difficult, but because the emotion felt too overwhelming? And to illustrate how powerful and dangerous this automatic reaction can be, consider a public figure who possessed extraordinary talent but couldn't control his emotional impulses, Mike Tyson. Even after accumulating a fortune exceeding $300 million, he lost almost everything because of decisions made in the heat of explosive, impulsive, and uncontrolled emotions. The failure wasn't in his physical ability or his intelligence. What was missing was control over the internal emotional pattern that governed his choices. This demonstrates in a brutal and impactful way that it's not external success that sustains a life. It's the internal pattern that supports or destroys it. And here we arrive at a real and profoundly human moment in Napoleon Hill's life, one of those events that reveal how even great mentors endure overwhelming emotional storms. Hill lost his newborn son, just over 1 month old. A devastating blow, capable of shattering any emotional structure. For months he struggled against a whirlwind of pain, disorientation, and despair. He himself said he felt his mind enter a pattern of darkness from which he believed he would never emerge. But it was precisely in this traumatic experience that he realized the power and danger of uncontrolled emotions. Hill managed to transform that emotional abyss into purpose. He didn't numb the pain, nor did he ignore it. but instead used that period to strengthen his vision of resilience, mental clarity, and emotional mastery. This profound transformation didn't come from theory. It came from the most brutal experience a human being can face. It's impossible to hear this story and not feel empathy, not connect with the stark reality of what happens when life knocks you down hard enough to take your breath away. Once you grasp this, you begin to understand that changing your life in the coming days doesn't demand controlling the world or the people around you. It requires starting to reprogram the automatic emotional patterns that have been controlling you. When financial pressure arises, instead of spiraling into panic, you learn to breathe and analyze with clarity. When someone criticizes you, instead of shrinking back, you identify the emotion and transform it into information. When an opportunity presents itself, instead of retreating, you create an emotional micro-habit of moving forward. This doesn't happen all at once. It unfolds through small choices, consciously repeated, and each micro-victory forges a new emotional path, capable of reconfiguring your identity and, with it, your entire life. Change begins when you realize your emotions aren't commands, they're signals, and that you are not a slave to what you feel. You are the observer, the interpreter, and the shaper of these patterns. When this understanding takes root, something extraordinary happens. Situations that once held you back begin to propel you forward. Pressures that used to paralyze you now strengthen you, and challenges that seemed impossible transform into clear opportunities for growth. This is how emotional patterns cease to be your enemy and become your ally. This is how life changes, not when the world gets better, but when you change the way you react to it. Inconsistency is one of the most treacherous patterns that exist because it doesn't destroy your life all at once. It erodes it gradually, silently, without you even noticing. You start a project with full energy, but after 3 days, you lose momentum. You decide to save money, but at the first frustration, you spend impulsively. You promise yourself you'll study every day, but on the first tired evening, you abandon everything. And the worst part is that deep down, you know exactly what you need to do, yet something within you always finds a way to postpone, forget, or give up. Most people believe they lack motivation. But the truth runs much deeper. What's missing is an internal pattern that sustains action when motivation fades. Motivation is unstable, emotional, variable. Consistency, however, is a pattern, and patterns can be created. The problem is that most people have had an unstable pattern of action since childhood. They were taught to act only when they felt good, when they were excited, when they were inspired. But those who act only when motivated never achieve anything extraordinary. That's why so many people start and so few finish. And this applies to all areas of life: money, health, career, relationships. How many times have you started a diet and given up in the first week? How many times have you said, "This time it's happening," only to revert to the same old habits? How many times have you promised to save money, only to let a momentary impulse destroy months of planning after just a few days of effort? This is the pattern of inconsistency, always repeating the same story with a predictable ending. Science explains this phenomenon. Research from the University of California shows that people who can clearly visualize their future have up to 40% more consistency in their daily habits, especially those related to money and emotional self-control. In other words, it's not a lack of effort, it's a lack of clarity. When your mind doesn't see a future strong enough to justify present sacrifice, it chooses the most comfortable path, even if that path leads you back to the results you despise. Inconsistency is the price you pay for not having a clear vision. And at the same time, it's a symptom of an internal pattern that needs to be reprogrammed. Consider a simple, common example. You decide to save money. You create a spreadsheet, cut expenses, organize everything. But after just 2 weeks, the old pattern returns. An impulsive purchase here, another there, a gift you didn't need, a delivery because I deserve it today. And before you know it, the plan has collapsed. What happened? You didn't fail due to a lack of financial capability. You failed because your emotional pattern wasn't aligned with the identity of someone who is consistent. Without realizing it, you were still reacting like the person who spends to alleviate an emotion, to fill a void, to seek a momentary sense of reward. Inconsistency isn't in what you do, but in what you believe about yourself. And to illustrate the power of consistency, one merely needs to look at the story of someone who mastered this pattern: Arnold Schwarzenegger. He didn't become a bodybuilding champion through genetics, nor a world-famous actor by luck, much less governed California by chance. His secret was always the same: to act daily as if he already were the person he wanted to become. He didn't train when he was motivated. He trained because it was the pattern. He didn't study English because it was easy. He studied because it was part of the future he had already visualized in his mind. Every repetition, every workout, every effort was a piece of his destiny being built with his own hands. And when you observe this, it becomes clear that success isn't about talent, it's about pattern. And here's an uncomfortable, yet liberating truth. You don't need to revolutionize your entire life to break this pattern. You just need to create a small daily action and repeat it. Small enough not to generate resistance, but significant enough to start reprogramming your brain. When you repeat an action for consecutive days, your brain interprets it as identity, and identity generates automatic behavior. This is how new patterns are born. Therefore, a simple challenge can completely change your trajectory. Choose a single action related to your goal and repeat it for 7 days without fail. One action, not 10. Something like reading 5 pages a day, saving $10 a day, training for 10 minutes a day, studying a skill for 15 minutes. What matters isn't the size of the action, but the consistency. Because consistency creates identity, and identity sustains results. The most profound, yet often most overlooked change is a change in identity. Because ultimately, you never act according to what you desire. You act according to who you believe yourself to be. That's why some people say they want to get rich, but continue to live like someone struggling to survive. That's why so many desire emotional security, but keep repeating behaviors that reinforce insecurity. That's why others dream of having discipline, but unconsciously see themselves as lazy, incapable, or not cut out for it. The pattern of identity is the core of everything. It's the invisible filter that defines what you accept, what you reject, what you try, what you avoid, whom you choose to love, how much money you believe you deserve to earn, and even what kind of future you consider possible. Perhaps you've never paused to notice this, but when someone says phrases like, "I'm terrible with money," "I always mess things up," "I can't learn this," "That's just how I am," they are announcing their own prison. These phrases, repeated thousands of times throughout life, become core beliefs, and core beliefs create automatic identities. And an automatic identity creates behaviors that repeat effortlessly. No matter how much you study, how much you try, how much you strive, if your identity doesn't change, your results will always be the same. It's like trying to drive a car with the parking brake on. You accelerate, you push, but you don't go anywhere. And the more effort you exert, the more you feel like the problem is you, when in reality the problem is who you believe yourself to be. Observe a simple yet very common situation. When a person tries to save money, but deep down believes they weren't born to be financially organized, they always find a way to return to chaos. They don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because everything they do contradicts who they believe themselves to be. This internal inconsistency generates frustration, guilt, and giving up. But the problem isn't with the method, it's with the identity pattern. On the other hand, when someone changes how they define themselves, something extraordinary happens. Even uncomfortable actions become natural. What once required willpower now flows effortlessly. Rewards take time, but they don't paralyze. Criticism hurts, but it doesn't destroy. Behavior ceases to be a daily struggle and becomes a natural consequence. And at this point, it's worth a pattern interruption that awakens something profound. What if you never had a financial problem? What if the only problem was always the identity you unknowingly adopted? What if your entire life is being guided by words someone told you years ago that you transformed into definitive truth? What if you are living as a reduced version of yourself, not for lack of potential, but out of loyalty to an identity that was never truly yours? When this possibility settles in your mind, even for a few seconds, It opens up space to question everything you once believed to be unquestionable. To understand the power of this change, one only needs to look at a real-life episode from Napoleon Hill's life that profoundly impacted his perception of identity. At one point, Hill became involved in a journalistic investigation that put him in confrontation with a criminal organization. The situation became so severe that he had to flee in a hurry, spending days in hiding, directionless, feeling vulnerable and threatened. He described this period as a moment when his identity was temporarily destroyed. He was no longer the confident writer, the determined researcher, the man building a philosophy of success. He was merely someone trying to survive. Yet during that time, something unexpected occurred. Amidst the fear, the silence, and the solitude, Hill experienced a kind of inner rebirth. It was there, at his lowest point, that he understood his true identity wasn't found in external circumstances, but in his purpose. And it was this realization that led him back to work with an almost supernatural clarity. He didn't just return with more strength, he returned with a new identity. True transformation doesn't happen when you try to be better. It happens when you decide to be someone else. Not in the sense of becoming someone you're not, but in the sense of finally embracing who you always could have been. That's when life begins to move at a speed that once seemed impossible. That's when you understand you were never trapped by circumstances. You were trapped by the role you believed you were obliged to play. But that role can be rewritten, reinvented, rebuilt. Life changes when identity changes. And when identity changes, you no longer need to struggle to transform your behaviors, because they become the natural consequence of who you finally decided to be. Real change happens when you replace old beliefs with new possibilities, when you learn to recognize your automatic emotional reactions, when you make consistency part of your identity, and most importantly, when you consciously choose who you want to be from this point forward. This is the most crucial point of all. You are not bound by who you were. You are free to become whoever you decide to be. And since you've come this far, I want to invite you to keep evolving. The next video appearing on your screen is literally the next step on your journey, a step that will further expand your vision, strengthen your new patterns, and help you become 1% better than you are right now. Thank you for being with me today. I'll see you in the next video.